us, but we're definitely got some folks waiting, so probably let's get started.
All right. Well, first off, thanks to everybody who is joining us at Virtual AIDSWatch 2020. My name is Jaron Benjamin, and I'm with Housing Works, and I'm co-presenting with Barb Cardell and Ebony Turk, both from Positive Women's Network. A little bit about Housing Works. We're the largest community-based AIDS service organization in the United States. We have about 5,000 clients and house about 800 folks. But the thing that I'm most proud of is that we fiercely fight not just to end the AIDS epidemic, not just to end homelessness, but to also build a more inclusive and just society where people who are members of the LGBT and trans population can actually have full-fledged rights, where Black Lives Matter and Brown Lives Matter too. I'm really proud of the work that we do. We're just going to talk a little bit briefly about some of the voter engagement work that we're involved in. And I'm going to give the lion's share of the time to Positive Women's Network. But first, I wanted to go over a couple of things. And basically, this workshop is going to entail a description of one Housing Works voter survey, and I included it because I think that it has some relevant points to what makes really good voter engagement. A very brief overview of our Get Out the Vote work that we plan for 2020. Some important points on the 2020 election, and then just a brief discussion about what's at stake, and then shining the light on some really important work that is being done locally. And then I'll step aside and allow PWN to shine the light on themselves, right? So really quickly on our voter survey, just so that everybody knows, every 2 years, Housing Works does a voter survey. It's self-reported. We engage staff, clients, and volunteers. And we usually get about 700 folks to respond to the survey. And all of this stuff is self-reported. So, that we're taking people at their words. But some of this data is good for unpacking. One, just Housing Works has a pretty good high rate of both registration and turnout. About 3/4 of our clients and almost 90% of our staff are registered to vote. A good number of them actually vote, and it all breaks down to about 54% of all of our clients voting and about 3/4 of our staff voting. And that's from 2018. Our numbers were a little bit down. About 92% of everybody who was registered to vote actually voted, as opposed to that 73 and 83%. And one of the big reasons why is because, well, in 2016 we're choosing a president. 2018 we are not. 2020 we are choosing a president. So hopefully voter turnout will be high. We know that voter turnout doesn't just come up on its own. It's something that has to be fostered and fomented. One other data point that I want to pull out of our voter survey is that folks who were involved in advocacy voted a lot more. Our clients were more than 2.5 times more likely to vote if they were directly involved in advocacy, if they were going to Albany or Washington, D.C. to talk to elected or appointed officials, if they're going to marches, rallies, and press conferences, if they're writing letters or sending emails or phone calling or calling phones of elected officials, they're much more likely to vote. And one really interesting thing that I found from the survey is that 20% of clients and 7% of staff thought that the government were doing enough. That is to say that about 80% of clients and 93% of staff said that the government could do more, which shows me that we have more work to do, even with our high turnout. Just a quick note on what we plan to do for 2020. We've actually never run a Get Out the Vote actual door-to-door, face-to-face project at Housing Works. I have in my professional capacity at other stops, but we're pretty excited about that. We have about 800 residents, and so our plan is to basically make face-to-face contact to ensure that all of our residents are registered to vote at their current address. Because the interesting thing about us, and we're an organization based in New York City, is that people are registered to vote in places that they live prior. And they still will go out there to vote, but we think we'll get higher turnout of people actually move their registration to their current address, and it also helps us get more sway with elected officials who are in that district. Going back to the advocacy point there, a small group of us are actually going to conduct the normal voter work. So, you know, posters, registration, drops, et cetera, et cetera. We register a lot of people to vote at our sites. And then the fun thing that we're going to do is that our on-site staff and the residents that are registered to vote at the residencies are actually just going to walk over to the precinct and vote together. So let me slow down a little bit because up until now I've been talking about plans that we've got for the 2020 election. And while the 2020 election is going to be an important one, it won't be a normal one. Everybody, if you know, there's a chat box, you should be able to access it. And if it'd be a really good time right now just to mention one thing that's changed. If you've got to get out the vote plan, just mention one thing that you're going to have to do to change. You know, your state and the primary may have canceled or postponed the primary. You may have had low turnout, or you may have had just kind of an irregular voting situation where everybody showed to vote up wearing N95 masks. But this is every election is important. 2020 is no exception, but it is super important, right? We've got somebody in the White House that we don't think is making a good faith effort to protect the rights of our community. And in fact, I would argue is chipping away at those rights and openly attacking us. One of the things that we are committed to doing, and Drew Gibson, who is moderating, he runs our AIDS United's public policy committee. He runs the PPC's committee on community mobilization. And what we're planning to do is to push for what's called no excuse absentee ballots across the nation. And I know that there's a little bit of trepidation about Trump trying to steal the election. He couldn't cancel the election outright. That's something that Congress has to do. But there are some ways, there are some loopholes with the way the Electoral College works that if Trump were to be able to do this, he could try to talk state legislatures and state houses into just saying that they're not going to recognize whatever poor turnout they have from their election and just assign their delegates to him. Now, that admittedly is a very, very far-fetched situation. I don't think that that could happen, but just to be safe, I think in these unprecedented times, we need an unprecedented measure of making sure that everybody in the nation has a no excuse absentee ballot. Now, finally, before I give the floor to Positive Women's Network, and some of their members are pictured there during the civil disobedience to save the Affordable Care Act, there's a lot at stake in this election. Before we went on, Barb and I were talking about some of the work that we've been doing for the last 4 years that, according to sources, has saved thousands, tens of thousands of lives. When you think about the botched handling of both test kits, personal protective equipment, everything the federal government should be responsible for during a pandemic, we're going to need access to healthcare even more. So just so many lives are at stake. Our civil rights, as I mentioned earlier, Donald Trump and his administration continue to try to chip away at so many hard-fought gains that we've got, and that must be stopped. We also, while the Trump administration has engaged in a strategy to end the HIV epidemic in the United States, we need more good faith effort. I would say that with everything that we've seen from this administration so far, I would say that they're engaging in a bad faith effort right now, right? I think that there are some good things that are happening, but overall, it's kind of hard to trust them. So there's a lot at stake. This is just a couple of scenes from our protest at the Supreme Court on October 8th of last year. It would be great if the next administration didn't have to be pushed just to not destroy our communities. Like they just keep at every turn doing that. And this isn't going to happen. We're not going to have the type of voter turnout that we need unless we're actually doing it at the ground level. So we can win the campaign for getting no excuse absentee ballots. We can do that, but what's going to happen if nobody is actually there to engage voters, and then to take voters the next step and engage them civically? I think that the group that's about to speak in a second is one of the best in the world at that. I tell Nana Khanna all the time that I think she's running one of the most important organizations in the world, and I'm sure everybody tells her that. And I am a card-carrying member as well. So without further ado, I want to pass it along to Barb and Ebony.
Great, thanks, Jaron. Thank you so much for that important overview and framing why it is so important for us to talk about elections. I'm going to go ahead and start our slides here. And sorry for making everybody a little bit dizzy here. Shared technology is a dream. All right. So, hi everybody, I'm Barb Cardell. I'm PWN USA's training director. I live in Boulder, Colorado, and I use they, them, their pronouns. Ebony Turk, who is our national field organizer, is going to co-present with me, and she'll go ahead and hop on in a minute. Thank you again for Jaron for framing the importance of this issue, not just as we talk about ensuring that people are registered to vote, but also that we share why it is so important for people to vote. We're going to go ahead and share with you why we believe at PWN USA that it is so important for our communities, especially women living with HIV, people living with HIV, communities that are most impacted by HIV, including our Southern groups and our Black and Brown communities, why it is so imperative that we are involved in electoral organizing and electoral work. We're going to talk about individuals and organizations and how you can be involved, even if you're in nonprofit spaces. And then we're also going to talk about why these increasing strategies are going to be so important in 2020 as we start into the election cycle. We're going to talk a little bit about PWN first so that everybody knows a little bit about who we are. But it sort of feels like we don't need to do much of an introduction because Jaron held up his card and talked a little bit about us. But for those of you who are not familiar, Positive Women's Network USA is a national organization and is the only national organization in the United States that is led by and for women and people of trans experience who are living with HIV. We first formed in 2008, where we brought together a body of 28 diverse individuals, everyone from a 17-year-old to an 83-year-old to people with a number of disabilities, as well as members of their trans community, to ensure that when we were talking about what kind of advocacy we needed for and by women and people of trans experience, we were doing this from our most informed place. Currently, we have over 3,000 members. We have chapters in many states. If you look up there and see that there's a chapter in your state and you would like to join us, go ahead and reach out to Ebony and I. There's going to be lots of opportunities for you to engage as we move forward in 2020. We also have state leads in 12 other states who are organizing a little less densely than the states that have our chapters. We always come back to our mission, which is to prepare and involve women living with HIV in all our diversity, including gender identity and sexual expression in all levels of policy and decision making. So we truly seek to meaningfully involve women living with HIV in everything that impacts our lives, now more than ever. We believe and we know that women living with HIV and people of trans experience living with HIV, really pretty much all of us, are the subject matter experts, and we seek to elevate our voices, with AIDSWatch being an incredible example of how our voices are elevated. PWN has 6 priority areas that we always like to mention because they form our core basis of how we do our work. We work on universal health care, economic justice, sexual and reproductive health rights and justice, ending criminalization, trans rights, safety and justice, and ending violence against women living with HIV. So we want to talk a little bit about why, as PWN and as community of people living with HIV or advocates who are supporting people living with HIV, we feel we have a role to play in elections. It's quite simply because our lives are at stake. And I know that this is a dramatic statement, but it really feels like now more than ever that we need to go back to the Denver Principles from 1983 and demand that nothing about us, without us, is ever really for us, and that we center the voices of those who are most impacted. When we think about the 1.1 million people who are living with HIV in the United States, we have a true voting bloc. If we vote our interests and we vote to ensure that the matters that are most important to us and members of our community, we can impact elections, both at the local, state, and federal level. It is important because we don't just come to elections and to polls by ourselves, though, because the 1.1 million people, think about how many other people we have in our lives who love us, who advocate for and with us. So when we take that 1.1 million, I like to think of us as being far, far more than that, a deeper reach and a broad reach, especially as we reach into the communities and into organizations that work with and for people living with HIV. Let's review what we think is at stake in 2020 coming up. Healthcare, absolutely at stake. They've already said that there's going to be a review of the Affordable Care Act that'll go before the Supreme Court after the election. We need to make sure that that is absolutely not going to happen because our lives are at stake. Medication access, immigration rights and safety, LGBTQ rights, access to a full and comprehensive sexual and reproductive health, including abortions, which we have already seen shrink in this COVID crisis. Some of the states have already limited access to abortions and sexual health services, saying that they are non-essential services. We know that our right and our bodily autonomy and our right to make decisions for ourselves is never, should never be waived and is always critical. The COVID-19 response. We have had many webinars. I'm sure you've been on many webinars with me where we've been talking about the overlap between HIV and COVID-19. As we move forward, we want to make sure that some of the lessons we learned early in the HIV epidemic are shared with COVID, that we don't criminalize people who are living with COVID like people living with HIV have been criminalized, that we don't use stigmatizing language, that we don't marginalize people. These are lessons that we need to share. And democracy. When we look at the diminishing of voter rights and voter engagement, I really believe that in this upcoming election, our very democracy is at stake. We have climate change that is at stake. And I'm going to invite people to put in the chat box anything else that they think that is at stake in this upcoming election that maybe I haven't mentioned.
And just on that note, if you could put your questions, there's a Q&A box specifically beneath the slides. You can put your questions there as well as in the chat.
And Drew, I can't see the chat box. So if there are people who are chatting things, do you mind reading them out?
Hold on one moment. Perhaps if folks could, based on the question here, sort of talk about how we're addressing get out the vote efforts with folks who are currently homeless.
Great, yes, that'll be an important part, and we'll get to that later. So I'll just go ahead and keep moving. We actually are taking our advocacy break, which I want to invite everybody to take a moment, and we're going to ask people to confirm that you are registered to vote. And so if you want to take a break, you can go ahead and either put this in the chat box, or you can go ahead and come back to it. But if you'd like to go to the USA.gov, confirm voter registration, this is where you can go ahead and make sure that you actually are registered to vote. So as we're talking about getting out the vote efforts, it's very important that we first make sure that our voter files and our voter records are in alignment. Moving along, elections matter. So we talked about what is at stake, but we also need to just sort of think about what has already been impacted as this current administration has whittled away the human rights that we all have worked so fiercely for. We need to talk about immigrants' rights and the detention in the camps and the inhumane conditions that people are being held under. We need to talk about the gap in access to healthcare, quality healthcare, including the significant difference between maternal healthcare and the large number of Black mothers who are dying after they give birth due to a number of systemic barriers and challenges and unacceptable reasons. We need to talk about cash bail that keeps people in jail because they're too poor to be able to pay to get out. We need to talk about the whittling away of trans rights, especially from the Health and Human Services Division. And we need to talk about HIV criminalization and modernization efforts and why that still is so important in these ongoing efforts and ongoing times. Most of these issues have some impact in elections. There is some elected official who either is implementing something that was developed or is trying to whittle away something. And so when we come to elections, we need to look at our elected officials, not just if they are camera ready and if we find them engaging and entertaining, but we need to dig down deeper. And in our candidate forums moving forward, we need to make sure that we're asking them questions about how they support what is important to us as a community. And then what happens after the elections? You know, this is what we have seen happen is we've seen the Trump administration move to revoke the transgender health benefits. That's on PBS. We have seen DA Krasner, who in Philadelphia, who's newly elected, who is reforming the criminal justice system in Philadelphia to make it more human rights centered and certainly fairer to communities that are most impacted by the carceral system. We need to talk about the impact of the public charge rule. We're seeing it even now as it's impacting people who are afraid to seek out care for coronavirus, even to get tested because they're worried that it will impact their immigration application. And then the confusion continues around public charge for people who are qualified, who are afraid to access SNAP benefits because they're afraid that it's going to impact someone in their family and their immigrant application. So when we talk about elections, these are direct impacts, some positive, some negative, from the last election cycle. So elections have consequences, and we need to really hold that in mind when we're out advocating for our communities as well. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ebony now because we can get organized, and PWN has some strategies around getting out the HIV vote that we're looking forward to sharing with you.
We absolutely do. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So I'm going to go through some ways that we can organize as a community and some strategies that you can get out the HIV community vote, the people we love, the people we care about, the people that love us, and the people that care about us. Barb, I don't know if you're going to switch the slides, but I don't have access to, or you want to switch it over to me. Thank you. So PWN knows organizing and getting out the HIV vote works because we've done it. We did it in 2018 with our chapters and our members. We had some groups of people, some groups of women living with HIV, some amazing groups of women living with HIV that wanted to make sure their communities were involved. So what they did was we got together, we did some trainings, and they went out and hit the streets. They went out and canvassed, phone banked, talked to their neighbors, their loved ones, their communities about the issues that was going on in their communities, the issues that were important to people. While they were out there talking, they registered voters everywhere they went. They knocked on doors, made sure to talk to people about the issues that were important to them, talk to people about why it was important to vote, because we know in our communities, a lot of people are leery about voting, understandably. So in order for us to hear people and understand what their reservations were, we had to go out there and talk to them. So we did just that by knocking on doors and walking the streets. We also partnered with some historical Black colleges. We partnered with some other aid service organizations. We partnered with some reproductive justice organizations. And then some of our members took it a step further and they signed up to be poll watchers. They signed up to work the polls. They made sure we had people running around at different polling locations, and they were making sure that those lines were moving. They were making sure that people were able to get up there and vote, and there weren't any irregularities happening. And if there were, because there were, that we reported them and that we asked questions. I was actually one of those people that was running around to different polling locations, making sure if I seen long lines, I went to the front of the lines. And that's a picture of our Houston member, Ms. Jessie Mona. She was doing the same thing, running around making sure that people had the ability to vote. We were also making sure that people knew their polling locations, because one of the things that states do to try to suppress the vote is changing polling locations without informing people. So we did all of those things, and PWN reached over 10,000 voters. And I think that was great for a lot of our members. This was the first time they did this. This was the first time, and they enjoyed it. They made sure they made an impact in their community, and it was a great start for them. Next slide. Why did it work? It worked because people living with HIV are leaders in their community. Without leaders, we organize, we make sure people get the information that they need when they're in need of something. We're well connected. We have resources, we know things, we get out there and we make sure that people, our community, our family, our friends also have the things that they need. So it worked because we're well connected in our community. It also worked because people trust the people that they know. If I know you, I'm more likely to take your advice. I know you and I trust you. I'm more likely to take your advice and believe what you're saying is facts and not just you trying to influence me to make a decision, but you're actually giving me the information that I need. Campaigns often ignore our community. I'm sure many of you know this. You don't see them out in our communities as much as they should be. You don't see them talking to our people as much as they may be in other communities. I noticed this last year while working in various types of communities, that our communities were not being touched at all. So it was very important that we got out and worked in the communities that we're a part of, because they don't come out and talk to low income folks. They don't come out and talk to the homeless. They don't come out and talk to people who are chronically ill or that have substance abuse, or sometimes even in senior living facilities. They don't come out and talk to the people in our communities. So we know that we are a powerful voting bloc. We know that we have people that get out to vote, and we know that our people need to vote on these issues. So we got out there and we got in our community. We need you to do that as well, because it works. We need people out there in our communities to make sure our people are voting on their issues. Next slide. I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself to the people. Barb introduced me at the beginning. I'm Ebony Turk. Sorry, guys. So in 2020, we can do this as a collective. We can all do our parts to make sure that we are getting our people out there to vote. The first thing is we can make sure that we elevate the issues that's important to us. As we know, if different communities, different economic status, different things are important to different people. We pretty much know what's important to the people around us, what's important to the people in our families, what's important to the people, to our neighbors. So we need to get out there and elevate those issues. We also need to, for the HIV community, we need to be elevating the issues that's important to HIV and the people who are most impacted by it. One of the biggest things that's talked about right now that everybody is talking about, healthcare for all. We all need healthcare. Our families need healthcare. It is a huge issue. So elevating those issues is also a way to connect to the community, connect to the people who, I found it a great way to connect to the people who said, I'm not going to vote because it doesn't seem to matter. Well, talking about those issues is a great way to make that connection. We can all collectively do it by increasing the voter turnout in our communities that's impacted by HIV. We want to make sure our people understand their ballots. That was so huge when we did it in 2018. We had a lot of meetings with our community and we brought ballots. We can all get sample ballots from the Board of Elections. They have them online. We brought ballots because we wanted to make sure people weren't walking into the voting booth without understanding who they were voting for. We wanted to make sure people knew who the people were on the ballot and what their issues were. So we did that, both sides, nonpartisan. We wanted to make sure that people knew exactly what they were doing when they walked into the voting booth. So we make sure people understand what's on those ballots. And then we help to build concrete skills for people who live with HIV to influence elections. When we, people in our community, people who live with HIV, understand about getting people out to vote, understanding the ballot, talking about the issues, all of those things are skills that we're able to influence the decisions of people in our community, talk to people in our community, and make sure that the more people we're getting out to vote, the more people are talking about the issues, the more people are educated on the issues, that influences elections. And we also leverage our organizing and service delivery power into votes at the ballot. Next slide. So we have a few principles. Key principle 1, your most powerful role in getting out the vote is reaching folks you know and trust. Person to person. I say this all the time. Talk to the people who you know, the people who trust you. That is, you're more likely to shift their beliefs if they're leery about voting, if they don't know who to vote for. You talk to the people that you know and that trust you, and they will a lot of times come along and you can help change their mind for the better. And leveraging your existing relationships. So I think it's important for organizations to do this too, because this is something that organizations can do, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But leveraging existing relationships with clients, fellow advocates, family members, neighbors, one of the most powerful steps you can take, and we've talked a lot about that. Go ahead, Barb. So our power lies in integrating voter engagement into other activities. So we want to make sure that we integrate what we're doing with trying to educate people and get people out to vote into other things that we're doing. So there are two different traditional get out to vote and then integrated voter engagement. Really quickly, traditional get out to vote is candidates, campaigns, and political parties. Integrated voter engagement, what we're doing, community-based groups. Traditional, the goals and outcomes of traditional is to win elections. After the election, the campaign is gone, the candidate either won or lost, but you don't really see or hear from them anymore. Integrated voter engagement, a community-based group like us, we increase civic engagement, we build lists of engaged community members, we develop new leaders, which is really great, because a lot of times those leaders turn out to run for elections years down the line. Educate and persuade the community, organize and mobilize community, strengthen and influence decision makers, and build power. If you notice, a lot of the things in this list, most of the things in this list, we're doing already with advocacy and other things. So we're just integrating voter engagement in that as well. And after the election, most important, after the election, the group is still there, following up with the community members, holding decision makers accountable. This is where our advocacy comes in. We're holding those people accountable. We've created relationships with some of those people that we've talked to. And we don't, no matter who won or who lost, we still have to engage with those legislators. So that's the difference between the traditional get out to vote and the integrated voter engagement. And we're encouraging integrated voter engagement because we need to continue this, this fight. We need to continue holding our elected officials accountable. Go ahead, Bart. Let's see what we got. All right, and then you can integrate civic engagement as well into everything you normally do. So when you send an email, you can put a voter registration link in your signature line. You can also include this as standard info on agency emails. A lot of times agencies think they can't do this, but you can. This is just encouraging people to register to vote. Everybody should be registered to vote. It's a nonpartisan activity. Encourage the staff and volunteers to vote. Every agency, everybody should be encouraging their staff and volunteers to vote. You even get time off, and hopefully everybody does this, get time off to go vote on voting day. So it's something that everybody can do. Put a poster up around voting rights in your waiting room. People should not assume people know their voting rights. People should not assume that people know that they should be able to leave work and go vote on voting day. These are things that everybody can do, agencies can do, where you can do where you're at to make sure we're doing civic engagement on a regular basis. Next slide, Bart. And as I was saying, yes, nonprofit organizations can be involved in electoral organizing too. It's nonpartisan. You can do nonpartisan. So nonprofit staff and volunteers may not suggest what candidate. You can't talk about what candidates to support or what party to join. However, you can engage in activities that have nothing to do with party or candidates. You can encourage people to vote. You can talk about the issues that are being talked about everywhere. You can even have a community forum and invite all of the people who are on different ballots, as long as you invite everybody and you don't talk partisan politics. You can just talk about issues. You can do that as a nonprofit organization. You can do that as a community leader. Nonprofits may conduct a broad range of volunteer education activities as long as they are nonpartisan and do not support or oppose any candidate. We don't support or oppose any candidate. We just talk about, the issues. We do some education. We make sure our community is informed. Yes, you can do that as a nonprofit. You should be doing that as a nonprofit because voting matters, as we know. You should be doing this. Next slide. So HIV service providers and advocacy organizations can also educate clients and constituents about voting and re-enfranchisement rights, essential dates, deadlines, and processes. They can display information on how and where to vote, early voting, timing, election day polling, what forms are needed, offer voter registration forms, assist clients in updating their name and addresses, registering for vote by mail, which will be really important during this situation we're in now. Voting by mail is important. In some states, you have to be deputized to register voters. It's a simple training. People can check their Secretary of State websites to do it. Call clients and constituents and remind them to vote. And elevate issues. Attend candidate forums or debates and query candidates about their stance on issues that matters to your organization and clients. So right now, since everything has turned virtual, there's a lot of these things happening online. Some of our members have been doing like candidate forums via Facebook Live, just so they can organize, so they can inform their community about the different people who are going, the different issues that's happening, and what the different people who are running will be, what their stance are on those issues. So their candidate forums, they can be done there too. We're encouraging people to vote by mail. I think this, Barb, you can go to the next slide because I think we have a lot of this there. So voter education, the when, where, and how of voting, learning what's on a ballot. And here are a few activities that organizations can do. Use your communications, events, video displays, classes, or forums to announce dates of elections and early voting period. Early voting is so important. And if you have it in your state, a lot of people don't know about it sometimes. So it's great if you can make those announcements. Remind people that voter registration deadlines and how to register online. If you have a state where you can register online, please register, make sure people are registering, register people online, make sure people are checking to make sure they're registered and they're correctly registered. Because I think Jaron was mentioning earlier about people moving. Make sure you're registered in your new address. Make sure if you got married, you're registered in your right name, because we know that they will use anything to stop us from voting. So we want to make sure everything is as correct as possible when we walk into the polls to vote. We want to make sure people know about their deadlines, help people get information on early voting in their polling place, partner with local events to provide voter education and registration. A lot of this happens, we do huge events around National HIV Testing Day. A lot of people do a lot of partnering to make sure people are registered to vote during those times as well. So partner with local organizations when they're doing events, that all the AIDSWatch and things like that. Make a short video interviews from constituents and staff on why they think voting is important. That's really important, and that's something really quick and easy to do. Most of us all have our little cell phones. You could just pull it out and ask people why they think it's important to vote. And that helps to influence other people to vote. That helps to influence other people to think about it more and look into it. So you can do that as well. Next slide, Barb. So the ballot education for nonprofits, I'm gonna go through this really quickly because I'm sure we're running out of time. Nonpartisan information is key. So you wanna make sure you share sample ballots. You can, as I said, you can get sample ballots online, and you can get them from your local Board of Elections. Host discussions about what's on the ballots. What do the various offices do? What do the ballot measures mean? These are things you can also do in a virtual chat or virtual meeting if needed. Let folks know where they can get information from. Because a lot of times people, even if people can't come to the meetings, as long as they get the resources, they know where to get it from, a lot of people will go and look at it themselves. So make sure they know where to get it from. Next slide. All right. Other relevant activities, I talked a little bit about this earlier. Voter protection, ensure rights are being upheld while voting. Make sure people are being able to get into polls during voting day. Make sure people are able to register to vote. Make sure there are no, if you can, make sure there are no voter suppression tactics happening. There is a number, there's an actual national number that you can call to report voter suppression tactics if you see them in your state. And address disenfranchisement, barriers to voter registration, access to ballots, restriction on polling places. And the only way you know these things is if you try to, you participate in them yourself, you make sure you check it out, you hear what people are saying and telling you, because we want to make sure that these voter suppression tactics and disenfranchisement is not happening. Next slide. And make sure everybody checks their state laws, because different states have different laws. So you want to make sure you know the laws about what's happening in your state. So digital organizing tools. I've been talking a little bit about this because we're in the era of physical distancing, not necessarily social distancing. We're physically distancing. So we want to make sure we use these tools: Hustle, Zoom, mass texting. Hustle is, I know a lot of you have been texted by people, we probably PWN, because we text our members to remind them to go vote. And you've probably got texts from other people around different issues. It's a platform called Hustle that helps us do that. We're on Zoom right now, and then mass texting. You could text and contact the people in your network, in your phone, in your community, to let them know, encourage them to request, absentee ballots if they need to. Call, if you have a network, what you could be doing right now is calling people, and as you're checking on them, make sure they understand that right now is a very key thing happening that voting affects. So this is why we need to vote. So talk to your list, talk to your family, your friends, the people in your network about the issues, about, have they voted that in their states. I know some states push primaries back, so they may need to do mail-in ballots. They may need to do absentee ballots. Talk to them about those things. Connect with people on social media. As I said, you can do education on social media, partner with allied orgs, emails, texts, and virtual hangouts. Barb, go ahead. Let's see. These are all social media options. You can do all of these things: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Snapchat is up here. I'm not so sure about Snapchat. I think I'm too old for it. So if you know how to use it, use it. But as you see, a lot of people have been doing a lot of amazing things over social media to get people involved. And the physical distancing has really, in a sense, brought people together and given people time to engage in things online that they haven't necessarily engaged in the busyness of life. So right now is a great opportunity to engage people on social media if you can. Next slide. So why isn't what isn't electoral organizing? Electoral organizing is a specific form of organizing around elections that can be issues and candidate based, includes voter engagement, registration, and education, can feed into issue based organizing, but doesn't always do, and is connected to an election calendar. Next slide. I'm gonna ask you guys a few questions really quickly. You can put your answers in the chat box. Mobilizing to stop a Supreme Court nominee. Is this electoral organizing? I'm just gonna go through a few of these so we don't have a lot of time. Fighting voter ID restrictions. Is this electoral organizing? Driving people to the polls to vote. Is that electoral organizing? Bird dogging candidates about reproductive rights. Is that electoral organizing? Well, here are your answers. Mobilizing to stop a Supreme Court nominee. That is not electoral organizing, because Supreme Court nominees first are appointed, and although we may want to stop it, we typically do advocacy around stopping those nominees. Fighting voter ID restrictions, yes, that's directly related to elections. Driving people to the polls, yes, directly related to elections. So you guys will get these slides. Bird dogging candidates about reproductive rights, yes, because we're actually talking to candidates about specific issues. So these things are electoral organizing, and you'll get you'll be available to get these slides so you can I see somebody say bird dogging. Bird dogging just simply means when candidates have forums, we go up to them, we talk to them about certain issues. So we try to really get them to pay attention and answer our questions and confront them about different issues that are important to us. Next slide. So in summary, getting out to vote can include analyzing the political landscape, elevating issues that's important to people living with HIV and our community in this 2020 election cycle, assessing candidates and their positions on critical issues, getting out the vote, voter registration, engagement, and mobilization. It is going to be really important for us to do registration, engagement, and mobilize our communities, and ensure our communities. And when I say our communities, I mean Black, Latinx, transgender folks, people living with HIV, the people who they try so hard to keep away from the polls. We want to make sure they're connected and engaged in the 2020 election. This election, every election is important, but this election is really important. The world is like, most of us have never seen it because most of us have only lived through, haven't lived through a pandemic of this size. I mean, that's not HIV. Next slide. And if you are interested, we have a nonpartisan project supporting the HIV community to lead get out to vote efforts in cities, congressional districts, and states. We have a scan code here where you can scan that, fill out a form. We'll have your information. If you want to get involved, you can get that code. Barb will put a link also in the comments so you guys can get involved. And hopefully we would love for you to get involved, so please do. I think that's your next, Barb.
Great, Ebony, thank you so much for taking us through that overview of electoral organizing, integrated voter engagement, and being able to mobilize both our communities now and also to demand that they are responsive to our needs, both before the election as they're running for office, but also after the election, because that is how we're going to make sure that we keep all of our rights and all of our needs at the forefront of elected official conversations. So we just want to end with a quote from the Wahida Shabazz-El, who is one of our founders. "We fight for our rights and safety. Without them, we die on the inside. When our voices are silenced on the outside, we disappear. We refuse to be ignored. Our lives matter, and we will save ourselves." So as just a reminder, when we're talking about voting matters, these are just 3 examples of, in the last couple of years, how voting has impacted lives of people living with HIV, communities who are vulnerable to acquiring HIV. We have Brianna Titone in the center, who is the first openly elected transgender representative in the state of Colorado. She won by 12 votes. So when people say that their vote matters, you can talk about Brianna and how important it is that everybody is voting and engaged. We have John Krizat, who is the Democratic DA in Dallas, and he has already started to institute a number of reforms around elections and around criminal justice. And then finally, we have question 3, which was upholding transgender protections in Massachusetts that passed by 68%. So when we talk about voter engagement and our lives being impacted by our voter engagement, especially as a community of people living with HIV and the people who love and support us, this is why we are talking about our voices being so important. So we have a few minutes for questions, and I have actually been keeping track of questions that have popped up in the chat box. So the first one is about how do you organize the vote with people who are unstably housed? Jaron, do you mind just answering that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I used to work for an organization called Local New York, one of the things that we did, especially since a lot of our constituents and a lot of our members were unstably housed and homeless, we were able to use even in a state like New York, which is progressive on and ahead of the curve on a lot of things. We're so far behind on electoral stuff. Like, we just got vote mail by vote this year. We were able to register people who are homeless or unstably housed at places that they receive services. So our organization was also a syringe exchange and provided some services so people could register to vote at our office. So even though it wasn't a residence, we were still able to do that, and it was totally legal. So just inquire your Board of Elections. They might be able to help you out with that, because everybody deserves a right to vote.
Thank you, Jaron. And then another question that came up is, how do you persuade people who are reluctant or say that they won't vote?
Oh boy, Ebony, do you want to tackle? Do you want to try this one?
Sure. So what I came in contact with this a lot when I was out doing canvassing and trying to get people to register to vote. That question came up a lot, and we do not shame people because we understand elections are complicated. Elections are sometimes disheartening. So we understand why people are not, sometimes don't want to vote or don't think it matters. So what I typically try to do is just talk about what's the most important issue happening for them in their lives right now. And when we talk about the issues and we connect those to the election, then it encourages them and helps them help it click and helps them understand how them voting can make a difference, locally as well as federally. And it teaches them also how those issues, how to address those issues. A lot of times they don't even know what to do to even start trying to fix an issue, because they just kind of sometimes gave up and just like, I'm gonna deal with it. But if you talk to them about the issue, talk to them who they should be talking to about that issue, how that issue affects them locally, how it affects them federally, then it actually empowers a lot of people to then get involved. It empowers them to want to tell other people, because now they know something that they know some of their people don't know, and then it encourages them to want to go and tell other people and to take people with them to vote. That's how we got a lot of our volunteers.
Thank you, Ebony. Thank you. And I love what's popping up in the chat box around no shaming, asking people what's important to them, making a connection from what is impacted in their lives to getting them to the polls. All of that is so important, as we are indeed talking to people about why this election all elections are so important, but especially this election. So one last question that we have is, what about people with felonies?
So felonies are a state by state type of issue. So you have to look it up and see if people in your state who have felonies can vote. This is a very confusing thing too, because some people don't understand, because you know, they make the language complicated so we don't understand. So but it's a state-to-state issue. There are a lot of states where felons can vote. In Illinois, they actually have voting booths in the jails this year, which was amazing for the primaries. So you actually have to look it up. I know Florida, they just restored some of their, their people who are, I hate to call people felons, people who have been incarcerated. They restored a lot of their voting rights. And They were fighting to try to make that not happen because they didn't want them to vote, but they do have the right to vote. So it's a state-by-state issue. You can look it up. PWN has a lot of states that are working on these types of things. So you guys are encouraged to reach out. Please sign up on our list. We send out information. Our members are working in your communities to help answer these types of questions. So please sign up so you can get this information, because a lot of times we don't know who can vote and who can't, but we're going to make sure, we're making sure, and the people in our community are making sure that we get that correct information out. So thanks for that question.
And Jaron, you had something that you wanted to share?
Yeah, so I saw a question in the chat box, and I want to share my screen quickly, Barb, if that's possible.
Yep, back to you.
So somebody brought up the fact that there aren't a lot of candidates talking about HIV this election cycle. And that was the problem that we had last election cycle as well. So when Secretary of State Hillary Clinton mentioned that that Nancy Reagan quietly started a conversation on HIV, we pushed back very loudly, and a coalition of us got together and started sending letters to both Sanders and Clinton, who back then, I think it was April and May, is when the meetings came together, where the two candidates left over in the Democratic primary. We also sent letters to people on the Republican side as well. Sanders and Clinton committed to meetings, and we pursued them like doggedly and forced them to sit down and meet with about 30 of us each. There's the photo proof that we made it happen. And one of the commitments that we forced them to make, both of them, was that if you win the nomination, we want an HIV positive speaker at the DNC, and we got that in 2016. In 2020, it's with Biden, we're in talks with Biden's camp to schedule a virtual meeting, because a 30-person face-to-face meeting is probably not going to happen. That's what we were talking about earlier. And we're approaching every person who's running for office or for president to do the same thing, because why not make that happen again?
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, Jaron. It is, that was some amazing advocacy that happened there for sure. Making sure that the voices of people living with HIV were elevated, absolutely. All right, so that is the end of our presentation. I want to thank my co-presenters, Ebony and Jaron, Drew for holding down the space for us, absolutely. AIDS United and all of the partners who, there we go, there's our AIDSWatch sponsors. AIDSWatch has always been an incredible opportunity for advocacy by people living with HIV and all of our partners. And it continues to be an amazing opportunity, even in virtual spaces. So thank you, AIDS United, and thank you to all of our sponsors. I'm going to flip back to our contact slide so that if people want to take a quick picture of it, you know how to reach out to any of us. And with that, I will see if there are any last thoughts. Jaron or Ebony, do you have a last thought that you'd like to share?
There, I'm unmuted. I just want to reiterate the importance of voting, but that it doesn't stop there. My grandpa, my mother's dad, used to call her every election day, every year, and ask her, "Did you go vote?" And the answer could never be no. Because if it was, he would always talk about the people who were friends of his that died so that she could have the right to vote. My mother was the first Black student to graduate from her high school, and her dad was an elected official that handed her diploma. That wouldn't have happened in rural southern Oklahoma if it hadn't been for the fight that just wouldn't go away out of the Black folks that really wanted that right to vote. It's a right, but also sometimes we have to look to it as a duty. And remember, it doesn't stop there. Just because we vote doesn't mean we pack up our bags and go home. we still got to get out there and get in their face and hold them accountable when they turn their backs on us. That's all I've got.
Great. Thank you, Jaron. Ebony?
Voting matters. Voting's important. Organize, mobilize, do what you can do to make sure people know that voting is important. This is a very important election. We are in we're sitting in a day and age and a time and an experience right now that proves that voting matters. So please get out and vote and encourage your community to as well. Thank you.
And I'll just conclude by saying our community is so important. We are all so humane and compassionate in our engagement and our advocacy. Please, if you're needing to connect with people, reach out. Be safe, be well. We'll get through this current COVID crisis, and we'll continue to do the work that we have been doing for many years as we continue to hold our community up and elevate the issues that are most important to us. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Drew.
All right, thank you so much for that amazing presentation. Hopefully, either later tonight or sometime later this week, we'll have recordings of all the sessions for folks, along with some more guidance around the policy briefs and what next steps are going to be. But thanks so much for coming to the first virtual AIDSWatch, and have a lovely day.